It all started with a phone call. I was at work, finishing up a long day when my buddy Jake called me. His voice was hesitant, which immediately felt off because Jake was the kind of guy who was always cracking jokes no matter what. "Hey man," he started. "You busy? I think you should come down to O'Malley's." O'Malley's was the bar my wife, Gina, had been going to with her new work friends every Friday. She'd been saying it was her way of unwinding after a tough week. I didn't mind, at least not at first. I trusted her. We'd been married 8 years, and while things weren't perfect, I thought we were solid. "Why? What's up?" I asked, already grabbing my jacket. He hesitated again, and I could hear the clinking of glasses and chatter in the background. "Look, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I think you should see something for yourself." By the time I got to O'Malley's, my mind was racing. I pushed open the heavy doors, and the smell of beer and fried food hit me. The place was packed, but Jake was waiting by the bar. He looked uncomfortable, rubbing the back of his neck. He motioned with his head toward the back booth. "Don't make a scene, all right?" I followed his gaze and saw her. Gina. Sitting way too close to some guy I didn't recognize. He had his arm draped casually over the back of the booth, and they were laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. I froze. My stomach dropped. Jake leaned in. "I wasn't sure, but they've been like that for an hour. She said hi to me earlier, but man, this doesn't look like just friends." I didn't know what to do. Every instinct told me to march over there, but I didn't want to cause a scene. Not yet. So I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of them, then left without saying a word. The ride home was a blur. I stared at the photo over and over, trying to figure out if I was imagining things. But I couldn't shake the image of the way she leaned into him, like she forgot she had a husband waiting for her at home. I didn't sleep that night. Gina got home around midnight, smelling like perfume and beer. She tried to tiptoe into the bedroom, but I was already sitting up in bed, waiting. She froze when she saw me. "Oh, you're still up?" she asked, her voice a little too casual. "Yeah, I couldn't sleep," I said, keeping my tone calm even though my chest felt like it was on fire. "How was O'Malley's?" She shrugged, slipping out of her heels. "The usual. Just hung out with the work crew. You know how it is." I didn't say anything for a moment, just watched her as she moved around the room, avoiding eye contact. "Who's the guy?" I asked finally. She stopped in her tracks, her back to me. "What guy?" "The guy you were all cozied up with in the back booth," I said, pulling out my phone and showing her the picture. Her face turned pale, but she recovered quickly, plastering on a defensive expression. "Oh, come on, Mark. That's just Eric. He's new at work. We were just talking." "Talking?" I scoffed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Gina, you were practically in his lap." She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "You're being ridiculous. Do you really think I'd cheat on you? I mean, seriously." I stared at her, trying to find even a shred of sincerity in her face, but all I saw was annoyance. Not guilt, not regret, just irritation that I'd caught her. "Jake saw you too," I said. "He said you were with him the whole time." Laughing, leaning into him. "How do you explain that?" She sighed like I was a kid throwing a tantrum. "Eric's going through a rough time, alright? His girlfriend dumped him, and he needed someone to talk to. I was being nice." "Being nice," I repeated, my voice sharp. "By letting him drape his arm around you and whisper in your ear." Her tone turned cold. "I don't have to defend myself to you, Mark. Maybe if you weren't so insecure, you wouldn't jump to conclusions over nothing." That hit me like a punch in the gut. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. She grabbed her pajamas and headed to the bathroom, slamming the door behind her. I just sat there, stunned. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it really was innocent. But deep down I knew something was wrong. That night I made a decision. If Gina wasn't going to give me the truth, I'd find it myself. The next morning, Gina acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek before heading out to work, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The photo I'd taken sat on my phone like a burning reminder of everything that didn't add up. I called Jake after she left. "Thanks for last night, man. I need to ask you something. Of course, Jake said. What's up? You said they were together all night. Did they look like more than friends? I need to know the truth. There was a long pause before Jake replied. I didn't want to say it last night, but yeah. They looked close. Too close. The way she laughed at his jokes touched his arm. It wasn't the way you act with someone you just work with. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it didn't sit right with me. Hearing it from him was like a punch to the gut. My hands were shaking as I thanked him and hung up. That's when I decided to dig deeper. Gina wasn't going to tell me the truth, so I needed to find it myself. I started with her phone. Gina had always been protective of it, keeping it face down or taking it with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. But that morning, she'd been in such a hurry that she left it charging in the kitchen. My heart was racing as I picked it up. Her passcode hadn't changed, her birthday. I opened her messages and scrolled through, but there was nothing suspicious at first. Then I saw a conversation with someone named E. The messages were short, vague, and scattered. E, can't stop thinking about last night. You looked amazing. Gina, you're sweet. But we have to be careful. E, he'll never know. Just say the word. Gina, not now. I need more time. My stomach dropped. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. It didn't take a genius to figure out who he was. I screen captured the messages and sent them to my own phone before putting hers back exactly as I'd found it. I wasn't done though. I spent the rest of the day digging through her social media, checking her tagged photos, and even scrolling back through old posts for any sign of this Eric guy. Sure enough, I found him. He was tagged in a group photo from a work event last month, standing right next to Gina with his hand on her lower back. That's when I realized, this wasn't new. After finding those texts, I felt like the walls were closing in. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, rereading their messages over and over. He'll never know, Eric had written, like I was some idiot they could easily fool. And Gina, my wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, she was going along with it, feeding me lies while sneaking around behind my back. But now I had proof. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm what my gut had been screaming at me all along. I just didn't know what to do with it yet. The rest of the day was a haze. I couldn't focus on anything. Every little memory of us, our wedding day, the vacations, the late-night talks, kept flashing through my mind, and now all I could think about was how much of it might have been a lie. By the time Gina came home, I decided not to confront her yet. Not until I had more. She breezed through the door like nothing had happened, smiling as she set her purse down. Hey babe, she said, leaning in to kiss me. I turned my head at the last second, and her lips caught my cheek instead. She pulled back, frowning. Everything okay? Yeah, just tired, I said, avoiding her eyes. She stared at me for a moment like she didn't quite believe me, but then shrugged and headed to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of wine. Long day at work, she said, almost to herself. Sometimes I think they forget I'm just one person. I stayed quiet, watching her from the couch. She was talking about work like she always did, rattling off complaints about deadlines and meetings, but all I could think about was those messages. Was she texting him right now? Was she waiting for me to leave the room so she could sneak off and call him? That night she went to bed early and I stayed up pretending to watch TV. As soon as I heard her breathing even out, I got to work. I started with her laptop, which she rarely used at home. I figured if she was smart, she wouldn't leave anything incriminating on it, but people get sloppy. Sure enough, I found an old email thread between her and Eric. Most of it was work-related, but there were a few messages that stood out. Eric, looking forward to Friday. I love our little tradition. Gina, me too. I'll make up some excuse for Mark. A pit formed in my stomach. So this wasn't just a one-time thing. They had traditions. Fridays at O'Malley's weren't about unwinding, they were their time together. I kept digging, scrolling through her browser history, her saved files, even her notes app. It felt dirty invading her privacy like that, but at this point I didn't care. If she was going to betray me, I wanted every last detail. And then I found it, a series of photos tucked away in a hidden folder labeled work stuff. My hands trembled as I opened them. There they were, Gina and Eric, sitting in a booth at O'Malley's, their faces close, his hand resting on her thigh. Another one of them at a park, her head on his shoulder. I felt sick. The proof was right there in front of me, undeniable. For a second I thought about waking her up and throwing the laptop in her face, demanding answers. But then I remembered the way she'd brushed me off the night before, acting like I was the crazy one for even questioning her. If I confronted her now, she'd just twist it around, make me feel like the bad guy. No, I needed to be smarter. The next day I called out of work and went to see a lawyer. I didn't know if I was ready to file for divorce yet, but I wanted to know my options. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Amanda, listened patiently as I laid everything out, from the texts to the photos. "You've got a strong case for infidelity," she said, nodding. "But if you want to protect yourself, I'd recommend gathering more evidence. Keep a record of everything, dates, times, any suspicious behavior. And don't let her know you're onto her. The element of surprise is your best weapon." I left her office feeling slightly more in control, but the weight of everything was still crushing. I'd spent years building a life with Gina, and now it felt like I was living with a stranger. That evening I acted like nothing was wrong. Gina came home, we ate dinner together, and I even managed to make small talk about her day. But inside I was seething. Every time she looked at her phone, I wondered if it was him. Every time she smiled, I wondered if it was because of something he'd said. She must have sensed something was off, because as we were cleaning up after dinner, she turned to me with a curious expression. "You've been really quiet lately. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, just work stuff," I said, forcing a smile. She tilted her head, studying me. "You sure? You've seemed distant." "Just tired," I said, brushing past her to put a plate in the sink. She didn't push it, but I could feel her watching me, like she was trying to figure out what was going on in my head. That night as she slept, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. Sooner or later I'd have to confront her, but not yet. Not until I had everything I needed to make sure she couldn't lie her way out of it. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the photos I'd taken of her texts and emails. My finger hovered over the screen, itching to send them to her, to call her out right then and there. But instead, I saved them to a secure folder and set my phone down. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next week was a game of cat and mouse. I watched Gina closely, looking for cracks in her story, while pretending everything was normal. It wasn't easy. Every smile, every casual "I love you" felt like a slap in the face now that I knew she had someone else on the side. On Tuesday she came home late, claiming she'd stayed behind to help a coworker finish a project. "We're all under so much pressure right now," she said, kicking off her shoes by the door. I didn't want to leave Eric hanging. I stiffened at the sound of his name, but she said it so casually, like she wasn't even thinking about it. It made me wonder how long this had been going on, how comfortable she'd gotten weaving him into our lives without me noticing. "Eric's lucky to have you," I said, forcing a neutral tone. She smiled and kissed me on the cheek. "You know me, I can't say no to helping out." That night I decided to test her. While she was in the shower I sent her a text, "Hey babe, I miss you already." A minute later I heard her phone buzz in the bedroom. Curious, I unlocked it. Her passcode hadn't changed, and opened my message. Sure enough, it was there, but right above it was a new message from Eric. "Eric, thanks for staying late. Couldn't have done it without you. Dinner Friday." My blood boiled. Dinner? Friday? She'd been sneaking around so openly it made me sick. But instead of blowing up, I took a screenshot and sent it to myself, then carefully put her phone back where I found it. When she came out of the bathroom, towel around her hair, I asked, "What's the plan for Friday?" "Another night at O'Malley's." She hesitated just long enough for me to catch it. Maybe. Not sure yet." "Why?" "Just wondering," I said, smiling like it didn't matter. "We haven't had a date night in a while. Thought we could grab dinner." Her expression shifted like she was calculating something. "That sounds nice, but this week might be tough. Maybe next week." I nodded, pretending to let it go, but inside I was fuming. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. The rest of the week I kept digging. I logged into her work email, which she'd foolishly saved on her laptop, and found a thread between her and Eric about their Friday plans. They were meeting at a restaurant downtown, not O'Malley's this time. He was stepping up his game, it seemed. I called Jake that night. "I need a favor," I said. "Anything, man," he replied. "I need you to come with me Friday night. Gina's meeting Eric and I want to catch them in the act." Jake didn't hesitate. "You sure you're ready for that?" "No," I admitted. "But I need to see it with my own eyes." Friday came faster than I expected. I told Gina I'd be working late and wouldn't be home until midnight. She didn't even question it, just nodded and kissed me goodbye as she left the house, all dressed up in her casual best. Jake and I parked outside the restaurant about 30 minutes later, watching as people came and went. It didn't take long to spot them. Gina and Eric walked in together, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. She even touched his arm as he held the door open for her. My hands clenched around the steering wheel. "There they are," I muttered. Jake put a hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" "No," I said, staring straight ahead. "But I'm going in." Jake started to argue, but I was already out of the car. My heart was pounding as I walked into the restaurant, scanning the tables until I saw them. They were seated in a corner booth, tucked away from most of the crowd, but not hidden enough. Eric was leaning across the table, saying something that made Gina laugh. Her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months and it tore me apart. That was supposed to be us. I walked right up to their table, and Gina's smile froze when she saw me. "Mark." She stammered, her face going pale. Eric turned, looking confused at first, but then his expression shifted to something smug, like he wasn't even sorry. "Hey man," he said, leaning back in his seat like he owned the place. I ignored him, keeping my eyes locked on Gina. "So this is your work meeting, huh?" I said, my voice low but trembling with anger. She opened her mouth but no words came out. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" I asked, pulling my phone from my pocket. "Because you've had plenty to say to Eric." I held up the screenshots of their texts and emails. "You're not as sneaky as you think." Her face crumpled and for a second I thought she might start crying. But instead she glared at me. "You've been spying on me? Are you serious right now?" I snapped. "You're the one sneaking around behind my back and you're mad at me for finding out?" Eric stood up then, trying to play the hero. "All right man, that's enough. Let's not make a scene." I turned to him, my fists clenched. "You don't get to tell me what's enough. You're the one sleeping with my wife." His smug expression faltered, but before he could respond, Gina grabbed my arm. "Let's go outside," she hissed, her voice panicked. "Why?" I asked, shaking her off. "So you can lie to me some more?" The whole restaurant was watching us now, and I could feel the tension rising. Jake appeared by the door, motioning for me to come outside, but I couldn't move. All I could do was stare at the woman I thought I knew, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. Jake pulled me outside before things got worse. I was shaking, torn between rage and heartbreak. Gina followed a minute later, her face red with embarrassment and anger. "What are you trying to do, Mark? Humiliate me?" She snapped, crossing her arms. I couldn't believe her audacity. "Humiliate you? You've been sneaking around with him for who knows how long and you think I'm the problem?" She threw up her hands. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it, Gina?" I shot back. "Because it sure looks like you've been lying to me for months." She hesitated, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for an excuse. Finally she muttered, "We're just friends. That's all." "Friends don't sneak off to dinner behind their spouses' backs," I said. "Stop lying. I've seen the messages, the photos, everything." Her face crumpled for a moment, but then she steeled herself. "Fine. Yes, I've been spending time with Eric. But it's not what you think. We never—" "I don't care what you did or didn't do," I interrupted, my voice cracking. "You broke my trust, Gina. That's worse than anything else." She didn't have an answer for that. Instead she just stood there silent while I walked away, leaving her and Eric behind. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Jake followed behind me, making sure I got home safe, but I didn't even acknowledge him when I pulled into the driveway. As soon as I walked through the door, the reality of everything hit me like a freight train. The house felt different, empty, cold. Every corner of it reminded me of Gina. The framed photos on the wall, the throw pillows she insisted we get, even the stupid candles she bought on sale that I always thought smelled too strong. I collapsed onto the couch, staring at nothing. My phone buzzed, and for a second I thought about ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was a text from Gina. "Mark, can we please talk? I know I messed up, but you don't have the full story. Please don't shut me out." I stared at the message, my chest tightening. Part of me wanted to call her, to yell, to demand answers. But another part of me, the part that had spent weeks feeling like a fool, wanted to block her number and never speak to her again. I didn't reply. Instead, I tossed my phone onto the coffee table and sat there in the dark, wondering how the hell my life had come to this. The next morning, Gina showed up at the house. I wasn't surprised. I'd ignored all her texts and calls, so I figured she'd try this. When I opened the door, she stood there looking disheveled, like she hadn't slept. "Mark, please," she said, her voice soft. "Can we just talk?" I wanted to slam the door in her face, but instead I stepped aside, letting her in. She hesitated for a second before walking into the living room. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands wringing in her lap. "I know I hurt you," she started, her voice shaking. "But it's not what you think. I swear." "Then tell me," I said, crossing my arms. "What exactly have you been doing with Eric? And don't lie to me, Gina. I have the texts, the emails, the pictures." "I know." Her face crumpled and she started crying. "It was stupid, okay? It started off innocent. He was going through a hard time and I was just trying to help him. But then," she paused, wiping her face. "He started saying things. Compliments, little jokes. I didn't think much of it at first." I laughed bitterly. "Yeah, I'm sure it was all harmless." She flinched but kept going. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you. I got caught up in it. The attention, the way he made me feel. The way I used to make you feel." I snapped, cutting her off. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. "So what, Gina? Did you sleep with him?" I asked, my voice rising. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "We never did anything physical. I swear, Mark. It was just texts, dinners, talking. That's all." I didn't believe her. Not entirely. But even if she was telling the truth, it didn't matter. The damage was done. "You betrayed me, Gina," I said, my voice quieter now. "Even if you didn't sleep with him, you still chose him over me. Over us." Her tears came harder and she reached out for my hand, but I pulled away. "Mark, I love you. I know I messed up, but I love you. Please, can't we fix this?" I stared at her, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, and realized I didn't recognize her anymore. "I don't know, Gina," I said, my voice cold. "I don't think I can ever trust you again." She stayed for a while, begging and pleading, but eventually she left. And when the door closed behind her, I felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. The house felt unbearably quiet after Gina left. I sat on the couch, staring at the door, half expecting her to come back and keep trying to explain herself. But the longer the silence stretched, the more final everything started to feel. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the screenshots I'd saved, her texts with Eric, the photos of them together. Each one felt like a fresh wound, reopening everything I was trying to process. Jake called later that night. "You doing okay, man?" he asked, his tone cautious. "No," I admitted. "I don't even know what I'm supposed to feel right now. Angry? Sad? Betrayed? I just feel empty." "You've got every right to feel all of that," Jake said. "But don't let her guilt trip you into forgiving her. She made her choices." "I know," I said, though the words felt hollow. "It's just, how do you move on from this? How do you look at someone you've built your life with and let it all go?" Jake didn't answer right away, and when he did, his voice was softer. "You don't have to figure that out right now. Take it one day at a time. And if you need anything, literally anything, you call me. After we hung up, I tried distracting myself with TV, but nothing could hold my attention. My mind kept drifting back to Gina, to Eric, to the life I thought we'd had. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from Gina. I can't sleep. I don't know how to fix this. Please, Mark, I need you. I stared at the message, my chest tightening. For years, I'd been the one she turned to when she was upset, the one who helped her through everything. And now, even after everything she'd done, part of me wanted to respond. To be there for her. But I didn't. Instead, I turned off my phone and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up feeling just as drained as the night before. Sleep didn't come easy, and when it did, it was restless. Images of Gina and Eric flashing in my mind every time I closed my eyes. Her text was still sitting there, unanswered. I stared at it for a long time. I can't sleep. I don't know how to fix this. Please, Mark, I need you. It was strange. Even though she claimed she needed me, it felt like the only thing she was trying to fix was her own guilt. She wasn't fighting for me. She was fighting for herself. I didn't respond. Instead, I decided to take Amanda's advice and keep gathering evidence, just in case I needed it. I pulled up our shared phone records, which I hadn't looked at in years. Gina and I had always been open about our finances, and I figured I might find something there. It didn't take long. Eric's number showed up repeatedly at all hours of the day. Calls, texts, even during times when Gina told me she was staying late at work or grabbing drinks with the girls. The pattern stretched back months, longer than I'd even suspected. I felt a sharp pang in my chest as the realization sunk in. This wasn't just a moment of weakness or a mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated choice. She'd been lying to me for months, living a double life right under my nose. By the time Jake called to check in, I was pacing the living room, trying to make sense of everything. Mark, he said cautiously, you sound like you're ready to snap. Talk to me, man. I just don't get it, I said, my voice cracking. Why lie for so long? Why not just come clean? If she didn't want to be with me anymore, why not just leave? Jake sighed. Because people like Gina don't think that way. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too. Keep you at home while Eric gave her whatever she thought she was missing. It's selfish, man. You're trying to find logic in something that's just plain wrong. His words made sense, but they didn't make the pain any easier to bear. I don't know what to do next, I admitted. I mean, I've got all this evidence, but then what? Divorce her? Drag it out in court? What about the house? The finances? Jake paused for a moment. I know it's overwhelming, but you've already taken the first step. You've got the proof. You've seen the truth. Now it's about deciding what you want. Not what she wants. Not what Eric wants. You. It sounded simple when he said it, but I felt paralyzed by the weight of it all. Later that day, Gina called. I debated whether to answer, but eventually I picked up. Mark, she said, her voice quiet. I know you're angry. I don't blame you. But I need to see you. Please, can we talk? What's there to talk about, Gina? I asked, my tone colder than I intended. You've been lying to me for months. Meeting Eric, texting him, calling him. And for what? So you could pretend like nothing was wrong at home. She started to cry, which used to pull at my heartstrings. But now, it just felt like another manipulation. I never wanted to hurt you, she said. I didn't mean for this to happen. I got caught up in something and I didn't know how to stop. That's not good enough, I said firmly. You don't accidentally end up in an emotional affair, Gina. You made a choice. Over and over again. There was a long silence before she said, You're right. I messed up. But I don't want to lose you, Mark. You're my husband. You're my best friend. Please, can we find a way to work through this? I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. You want to work through this? After everything you've done? How am I supposed to believe a single word you say? I'll do anything, she pleaded. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just, don't give up on us. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment I felt torn. Part of me wanted to believe her, to think that maybe this was salvageable. But then I remembered the texts, the photos, the lies. I need time to think, I said finally, and I hung up before she could respond. That night, I sat in the living room, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. We looked so happy, so full of hope. It felt like a lifetime ago, like I was looking at strangers. I didn't sleep much, but by the time the sun came up, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to let Gina or Eric control the narrative anymore. It was time to take back my life. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. For weeks, I'd been drowning in anger, heartbreak, and confusion, letting Gina's lies dictate my every move. But now something shifted. I realized I couldn't keep living like this, stuck in limbo, waiting for her to decide what my life would look like. I grabbed my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Amanda, my lawyer. "I'm ready to move forward," I told her. Her voice was calm but firm. "Good. Let's set up a meeting to go over everything. I'll make sure you're protected." The second call was to a locksmith. By lunchtime, I had new locks on every door in the house. Gina still had a key, but not anymore. If she wanted to talk, it wouldn't be in the space we once shared. That evening, Gina showed up. She knocked, probably realizing her key didn't work, and I opened the door just enough to see her face. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes darting to the new lock. "We're done, Gina," I said, my voice steady. "I called a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce." Her face crumpled and she shook her head. "No, Mark, please. You can't just throw this all away. We can fix this. I'll prove it to you." I stepped outside, shutting the door behind me. "You already threw it away," I said, my tone sharp. "You chose Eric. You chose lies. This isn't something you can undo." She started crying, wiping at her face like it would change my mind. "I made a mistake," she said. "One mistake. Are you really going to end everything we've built over that?" "It wasn't one mistake," I shot back. "It was months of lying, sneaking around, and disrespecting our marriage." "That's not a mistake, Gina. That's a pattern." She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop her. "This isn't up for debate," I said. "You made your choices, and now I'm making mine. You can contact my lawyer if you have questions. Otherwise, I think it's best if we don't talk anymore." Her expression shifted from desperate to angry. "So that's it? You're just giving up on us?" "I'm not giving up on anything," I said, my voice low but firm. "You already did." I went back inside and locked the door. I could hear her sobbing on the other side, but I didn't open it again. Instead, I sat down and let the silence wash over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. After Gina left, the reality of what I'd done started to set in. The house was eerily quiet. No sound of her humming in the kitchen, no clinking of her wineglass as she settled in for the evening. It was just me now, surrounded by the life we'd built together, with nothing but time to reflect on how it all fell apart. The first night alone was the hardest. I kept replaying our conversation at the door, the look in her eyes when I told her it was over. There was a time when her tears would have broken me, but now they felt hollow. They weren't about losing me. They were about her losing control. The next day, I decided to take another step forward. I went through the house, collecting anything that reminded me of her. The photos, the little trinkets we'd picked up on vacations, the sweater she always left draped over the armchair. It all went into a box. I thought it would feel satisfying, like taking back my space, but instead it just felt empty. Like I was erasing part of myself along with her. Jake came over that evening with pizza and beer, insisting I needed company. "You holding up okay?" he asked, handing me a slice. "Honestly? I don't know," I admitted. One minute I feel relieved, like I'm finally doing the right thing. The next, I feel like I'm drowning all over again. Jake nodded, taking a sip of his beer. "That's normal. You've been through hell, man. It's gonna take time." We talked for a while, about everything but Gina. For the first time in weeks, I laughed at one of his stupid jokes, and for a moment I felt like myself again. But that moment didn't last long. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Mark, it's Eric. Can we talk? I think we owe each other that much." I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. Of all the things I'd expected, this wasn't one of them. My first instinct was to ignore it, to block the number and pretend it never happened. But a part of me, the part that still felt raw and angry, wanted to hear what he had to say. Against my better judgment, I replied, "What could you possibly have to say to me?" His response came quickly. "I just want to explain my side. Please just meet me once. After that, I'll leave you alone." I didn't reply right away. I sat there, staring at my phone, wondering what kind of audacity it took for him to reach out to me after everything he'd done. Did he think an apology would make it better? That I'd somehow forgive him? I went to bed that night without answering, but his message stayed with me. By the time I woke up the next morning, I'd made up my mind. If Eric wanted to talk, I'd let him. Not because I cared about his side of the story, but because I needed to look him in the eye and tell him exactly what he'd taken from me. The next day I messaged Eric back, "Fine. One meeting. Tomorrow at 3. O'Malley's." I chose the bar deliberately. It was where this whole mess had started, and if he had the nerve to sit across from me there, then maybe I'd get a glimpse of the person he really was. When I walked in, Eric was already there, sitting at a corner table with a drink in front of him. He looked nervous, tapping his fingers on the table, but when he saw me he forced a smile. "Mark," he said, standing up and offering his hand. I ignored it, sitting down across from him without a word. For a moment we just stared at each other. I could feel the tension between us, thick enough to choke on. Finally, Eric cleared his throat. "I appreciate you meeting me," he said. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now." "You got that right," I said flatly. "So go on. Explain yourself." He shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not going to make excuses," he said. "What I did was wrong. I crossed a line and I know that. But I didn't mean for it to happen." I laughed bitterly. "Didn't mean for it to happen? Eric, you've been texting my wife, meeting her behind my back for months. You don't accidentally do that." "I know," he said quickly. "I know how it sounds. But it wasn't like I set out to ruin your marriage. It just happened. We started talking at work and we connected. I guess I let it get too far." "You guess?" I snapped. "You're unbelievable. Do you even realize what you've done? You didn't just let it get too far. You lied, manipulated, and destroyed the trust in my marriage. And for what? To stroke your ego." He flinched but didn't argue. "I know you're angry." "Angry?" I cut him off, my voice rising. "I'm not just angry, Eric. I'm furious. You stole something from me. You took the person I trusted most and turned her against me. And now you want to sit here and act like you're sorry." "I am sorry," he said, his voice shaking. "I don't know how to make you believe that, but I am. I regret everything." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. He didn't look smug now. He looked like a broken man, but it didn't make me feel any better. "Why are you even here?" I asked finally. "What do you want from me?" He hesitated, then said, "I guess, I just wanted to own up to it. To tell you face to face that I messed up. And that, it's over. I've cut things off with Gina." I clenched my jaw, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. "You don't get to decide when it's over," I said. "This isn't about you. It's about what you and Gina did to me, to our marriage. You don't get to walk away from this clean." He nodded, looking down at his drink. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't deserve your forgiveness and I'm not asking for it. I thought you should know." For a moment I didn't say anything. I just sat there, staring at him, wondering how someone who seemed so ordinary could cause so much pain. Finally I stood up. "You're right about one thing," I said. "You don't deserve my forgiveness. And you're not getting it." I turned and walked out, leaving him sitting there alone. As I stepped into the cool afternoon air, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, relief, and something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't closure, not exactly, but it felt like a step forward. After the meeting with Eric, I drove around aimlessly for a while, trying to process everything. His words replayed in my head, over and over. His half-hearted apology, his claims that he'd cut Gina off. None of it mattered. Whether he was truly sorry or not didn't change what had happened. I ended up at a park Gina and I used to visit when we first started dating. I didn't go there intentionally, it was just where my car took me. Sitting on one of the old wooden benches, I looked out at the lake, thinking about how happy we used to be. Back then everything felt so simple. We'd talk about our future, about the life we wanted to build together. And for a while it felt like we'd done it. But now all those memories felt tainted, like they belonged to someone else. I thought about calling Jake or even Amanda, but I didn't. I needed to sit with my thoughts, to face the weight of what I was going through without distractions. By the time I got home it was dark. The house felt even emptier than before, like the silence had grown louder somehow. I poured myself a drink and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the box of Gina's things I'd packed up. I decided it was time to deal with it. The next morning I called Gina and told her to come pick up her stuff. When she arrived she looked nervous, like she wasn't sure how I'd react. "Thank you for calling me," she said softly as I handed her the box. "It's everything that was yours," I said, keeping my tone even. "You don't need to come back here again." She hesitated, her hands gripping the box tightly. "Mark, I know you don't want to hear this, but I really am sorry. For everything." I looked at her, the woman I'd loved for so many years, and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I just felt tired. "I know you're sorry, Gina," I said. "But sorry doesn't fix this. It doesn't undo what you did." Her eyes filled with tears and she nodded. "I understand. I hope someday you can forgive me." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the door and gestured for her to leave. She walked out slowly, turning back once to look at me, but I didn't meet her gaze. When the door closed behind her, I let out a long breath, feeling the weight of it all start to lift. It wasn't closure, not entirely, but it was a step. That night I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone. I deleted every picture of Gina, every message, every trace of her from my life. It hurt more than I expected, but it also felt like I was reclaiming something, my space, my peace. I still didn't know what the future held or how long it would take to truly move on, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The days that followed were quiet. Painfully quiet. But there was also a strange comfort in the solitude. I didn't have to walk on eggshells anymore or second-guess every word out of Gina's mouth. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was in control of my life again. Jake kept checking in, making sure I wasn't drowning in my own thoughts. One night, he dragged me out for drinks, insisting that I needed to be around people who actually give a damn about you. We ended up at a different bar, somewhere Gina had never been. It felt good to be in a new place, surrounded by strangers, without the weight of our shared history pressing down on me. Jake spent the night cracking jokes, making fun of himself, and doing whatever he could to make me laugh. "You know," he said, raising his beer, "this whole thing sucks. But if there's one silver lining, it's that you don't have to waste another minute on someone who didn't deserve you." I clinked my glass against his. "Here's to that." When I got home that night, I didn't feel as heavy. For the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could be okay again. I started making small changes. Rearranging furniture. Painting the living room a new color. Tossing out old things that didn't serve a purpose anymore. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about creating something new. One evening, while sorting through a box of old keepsakes, I came across a photo from a fishing trip I'd taken with my dad years ago. We were smiling, holding up our catches like we'd conquered the world. I couldn't remember the last time I felt that carefree. It made me realize how much I'd neglected myself over the years. Gina and I had built a life together, but somewhere along the way I'd lost pieces of who I was. Now it was time to find those pieces again. I started going for runs in the mornings, something I used to love before life got in the way. I signed up for a weekend woodworking class, a hobby I'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. Slowly but surely I was rebuilding, not just my life but myself. Gina texted me once more, about a month after I'd filed for divorce. It was a long message, full of apologies and reflections, but I didn't read past the first few lines. I deleted it without responding. She was part of my past now. And I was done letting the past dictate my future. One afternoon, as I was working on a small woodworking project in the garage, Jake stopped by. He leaned against the doorframe, grinning. "You look good, man," he said. "Like really good. I don't think I've seen you this calm in years." I laughed, wiping sawdust off my hands. "Feels good too. I mean, it's not easy, but I think I'm finally starting to move on." Jake nodded, cracking open a soda he'd brought. "You deserve it. And hey, who knows? Maybe someday you'll meet someone who actually appreciates what you bring to the table." I didn't say anything at first, just smiled and looked down at the piece of wood in my hands. "Maybe," I said finally. "But for now, I'm good just figuring out who I am again." And I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking backward or forward. I was just here in the present, rebuilding my life one step at a time. And for now, that was enough.